Marvel under Disney has now made around $13.2 billion. Considering it only cost them $4, I think we could all say that's a pretty good deal. Of course we can say that now, looking back. But early on, when they only had 2 Iron Man movies, a Thor movie, and a Hulk movie that they ultimately recast, I can see how people didn't believe in the overall vision. Then enters Captain America, the First Avenger. This was the 5th movie of the first phase of the MCU, and the last one before one of the biggest team-ups in cinema history. This movie had to succeed not only financially, but also in its storytelling, and to set up the very next film that would ultimately be The Avengers. I saw this movie back in 2011 like many people, and outside of the theater I thought it was okay. But now revisiting it, I feel like it's actually great. And I took a peek at the scores it has and feel like it's actually pretty underrated. So join me as we take another look at Captain America, the First Avenger. In Captain America, the First Avenger, Steve Rogers, played by Chris Evans, starts off as a scrawny kid from Brooklyn who sounds kinda buff actually, like his voice doesn't match his face that well. Which is weird because it's the same face, but less muscly. He just sounds buff to me.
I got beat up in that alley. In that parking lot. Behind that diner.
And at times the debuffer CGI looks pretty good, and others it doesn't, and he does stay skinny for a good portion of the film. He really had to, because a lot of important storytelling happens while he's, the little scrawny kid from Brooklyn. He drops his iconic line for the very first time,
I can do this all day.
which I believe truly doesn't pay off until Civil War.
I could do this all day.
There's some foreshadowing with the shield, and they just really took their time here to show what kind of person Steve is. So after many failed attempts to join the army, German Stanley Tucci sees him, and after talking to him for a bit, believes he's actually the perfect person for his experiment. So he approves his application and sends his little ass to boot camp, where he fails at all the physical stuff, but excels at the mental and demonstrates tremendous heart. We also have Tommy Lee Jones playing Colonel Chester Phillips. His whole role is just to simply not believe in Steve, and I always forget that he's in this movie, but it's not that he doesn't do a great job, there's so much going on, he kind of takes a back seat a little bit. Someone who's very much in the front seat is Miss Peggy Carter, played by the wonderful Haley Atwell. As the film goes on, she becomes the true love interest, and there's a little bit of a will they won't they situation.
Go get him.
I'm not kissing you.
Of course, this all goes away and she totally has a crush on him, especially once he gets very juicy. He gets so juicy that Miss Atwell almost broke character wanting to motorboat them titties. I think at the time this was one of the crazier body transformations. Of course, yeah, we've seen Thor, and Hemsworth's body has always been crazy. We of course had Hugh going bonkers as Wolverine, but from a gains standpoint, I think Evans was just a huge deal. And I like how the body is presented to us in the film as well. It's all sweaty and shit, it's like a big deal. And that scene on its own became pretty iconic. I also like how they did the whole new bodies, new power test run. Every superhero origin film has that, where they're like working out the new stuff and see how it controls in a way.
Go! Go! Go, Web, go!
Even though Cap's powers aren't outrageous, like he doesn't turn green or he shoots web out of his hands or even fly, even though he does jump super high, he still has to get used to his body and the strength and kind of test it out. That's why I really love him running into the shop window. So the government juiced up Rogers to try and stop the Nazis and their research division called Hydra, who's led by Johann Schmidt, who injected himself with Dr. Tucci's unfinished formula of the serum, giving him the abilities, but also messing up his face, ultimately giving him the name of Red Skull. Hugo Weaving plays a great villain, but I do feel like Marvel kind of blew their villain load a little bit here, because Red Skull really is Cap's main bad guy. I won't go as far as to say that he was wasted here, but I would have expected way more from the character, making an impact throughout Cap's story, throughout his whole tenure in the MCU. We do get to see him again, but not until Endgame, as he's the guardian of the Soul Stone. Speaking of Stone, this is the first film that features the Tesseract, which plays a huge part in the MCU, of course, not only as an Infinity Stone later on, but in the very next film where Loki gets a hold of it and starts causing mayhem all over the place. Also in this film, we have the introduction of Bucky Barnes, played by Sebastian Stan. This movie serves as the seed, a glimpse into their relationship, which is very important later on when Bucky is eventually turned into the Winter Soldier. This whole movie is the reason why Cap feels the way that he does towards Bucky, and because he was carrying the guilt of his death throughout until those films. So that was yet another seed that was paid off later on in the franchise. In the middle of the movie, we do see Cap being used more as a poster boy for the war, because even though he looked the part, the army didn't necessarily believe in him. This is where we see a shout out to one of Captain America's most famous comic covers, along with the old suit, and seeing that was super fun, and I liked how it was used as well. I also thought it was a brilliant move how they introduced the new suit, a new design that is actually perfect in the sense that it worked to modernize it for us, the audience, but also it fits that time that the movie is taking place in the 1940s. This is also an action film, and the film takes its time to introduce the action. Steve does get his ass kicked pretty early, but real action doesn't come in until later in the film. And I would usually be impatient for action films. I want to sit down and see my splodies, like what are we doing here? But the story parts of this film feel way more important than the splodies. So I didn't mind that the splodies did eventually come, but they don't come until later in the film where it makes sense, where he decides to go save Bucky and the rest of the soldiers. The film's depiction of war is a good one as well. It was originally planned for Logan and Magneto to cameo in this film since the characters were present during World War II, but the idea had to be scrapped due to right issues. This film really made me look back and retroactively appreciate Captain America even more, especially as a character. He was never one of my faves, but now that he's missing, I kind of do miss him and appreciate him now. How great of a character he is. He's a character that didn't actually change a whole lot. He stayed true to himself throughout the whole time. No matter what obstacle lay ahead, he was always to the core that scrawny kid from Brooklyn.
I'm just a kid from Brooklyn.
All this movie did was match the inside with the outside, creating a superhero, because now you have the perfect specimen because of what Dr. Tucci says.
The serum amplifies everything that is inside, so good becomes great, bad becomes worse.
And nothing shows what type of person Steve is than the grenade scene. Willing to sacrifice himself, a trait that is not only showed at the end of this film, but throughout the entirety of the MCU. Like sacrificing Mjolnir to Thor even though he knows he can wield it.
Come on, Cap.
Nothing. I knew it.
That's why in Endgame, it's such an impact that he actually finally made a decision for himself.
Try some of that life Tony was telling me to get.
I think also a big deal that kind of goes unnoticed is that he promised Dr. Tucci that he will be a great man.
Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing, that you will stay who you are.
Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
He stayed true to that promise and stayed that way throughout the whole MCU. It also helps that It also helps that it's true to his nature, so it was a very easy promise to keep. I just didn't realize at the time how important this film actually was to the MCU. Everything it did right, all the seeds that it planted for the future, that eventually were paid off later on. Let me know your appreciation for Captain America down below. What is your favorite Captain moment? What is your favorite Captain film? Any non-Captain America thoughts? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to always and forever, you do you.